Welcome to the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cormer, and I'm excited to be hosting the podcast today live from the Federation of British International Schools in Asia, or FOBISIA. Some people say FOBISIA, from the FOBISIA Music Teachers Conference. And this conference brings together music teachers from the region to collaborate and learn together. This community has a long history, actually, of supporting music students and music teachers with festivals and conferences, and this is the first face-to-face event in many years. So today, I have the privilege of speaking with three music teachers who are here at the conference and who have each been teaching in international schools for various lengths of time, which we'll explore a bit during this episode. We have an audience here as well who might also chip in with some questions, so we'll see how that goes. So to kick us off, I'm going to introduce Delphine, and she's worked for 20 years at Tanglin Trust International School in Singapore. So how you doing, Delphine?
Good, thanks, Chris.
Great. Delphine, since you've been 20 years at Tanglin Trust, and we've known each other for a while, which has been cool, can you tell me kind of what has changed over those 20 years, having worked in an international school as a music teacher?
Well, I mean, the curriculum's changed an awful lot. It used to be very separate infant, junior and senior schools. And in recent years, we developed a curriculum that goes all the way through. And so we tried being more collaborative. And the schools got much bigger. So it used to be, you knew everybody. And when I started, we knew everybody. And now people, you clap them to say goodbye, and you've never even met them. So it is a big campus, and it does have a small feel in the infant school, but you definitely don't know as many people as you used to. But I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a change in dynamics. And the students have changed massively as well. It used to be quite a few of the students did the whole journey from nursery to sixth form. And now I'd say there's only about 3 in most year groups that get all the way through.
Yeah, right.
Because the expats in Singapore have changed and COVID changed them. And even before COVID, there used to be lots of British, and now it's much more culturally diverse. So there's a lot less primarily English or British or Australian mostly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And has the city changed even in those 20 years, and how?
The city changes every day. I mean, things like the public transport, we were talking about it earlier, the MRTs are amazing, and the buses. And it used to be that everybody got taxis, but now taxis are expensive. So people tend to get buses and trains and things. And like the general feel of Singapore has changed a lot as well. It used to be, I don't know, it just feels much more, I can't phrase it properly. Do you feel more like you are a tourist rather than being a local? Having lived there 20 years, when you first came, everyone was quite happy that you were there. And now it's a different kind of feel. People are much more transient. They're like, oh, when are you leaving? Rather than you're here for life.
In terms of curriculum, having been in one school for 20 years, what's kind of been your favourite thing that you've developed in your primary school, right?
I'm infants.
Infants. Okay, yeah. What's sort of your favourite element of the infants curriculum that you have?
I think it's mainly things I've picked up from conference, actually. So things like singing playground. I was lucky enough to see it on conference, and then we brought them out. I think you perhaps came to one of those at Tanglin. And Tanglin's very good at kind of, if you have ideas, letting you take them forwards. So my line managers have always been, okay, great, that's new, give it a try. So we've done taiko drumming, that we've met somebody locally and set up taiko drums. So I quite like the fact that we've had lots of new initiatives, and Tanglin's been supportive of those things in the music curriculum. So we sing on quite a big scale and do things quite big, which is nice.
Great. And we've all been talking about the impact of COVID on music programs and how heavy that's been. I guess now there's this kind of sense in the community here at the FOBISIA conference of renewal. Like, we've kind of got concerts back, and maybe too many concerts back. For some of us, it's just all happening again. But what are you kind of looking forward to this year ahead?
We're really lucky because we've got a new building, the TCB building. And I keep calling it my building, but it's not, because the infant music is the only bit of level 4. So that's been a long time coming. It stopped because of COVID, and it just sort of stood there, not quite finished. And any second now, that's opening.
What's the TCB?
Tanglin Centenary Building, because we're Tanglin's 100 in 2024. So there's lots of kind of things moving towards that. So that's quite exciting. So I'm moving, and the senior music's moving, and lots of exciting new things with that will be coming up.
That sounds great. Cool. Well, thanks for that and for sharing your insight. We're going to move on now to Emma. So Emma, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's really cool to have met you today. And Emma has worked for 4 years, also in Singapore, but at Dover Court International School. What's it like working at Dover Court International School?
Every day is different. It's very vibrant. We have a lot of very diverse students with very diverse needs, which makes every day challenging but also fulfilling as well. Musically, but also from a behaviour point of view, from a logistical point of view, from a can you walk through the canteen and survive point of view. There's lots of very kind of energetic young people there.
Yeah, wow. And how did you get to international schooling? You've been there 4 years. Is this your first school? And if not, or if it is, how did you sort of get to this position you're in now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I haven't always been very strategic about my career in terms of I've always known where I've wanted to go. It's very much been like opportunistic. However, I was lucky enough to spend a year in Australia at a local school. I'm
sorry to hear it.
Sorry?
I'm sorry to hear you had to
Well,
spend
no, it
time in
inspired me
Australia.
to do more travelling. So I did kind of a life swap. It was kind of like the holiday, but Jude Law didn't turn up at my door, unfortunately. So I worked at Trinity Grammar in Kew for a year in Melbourne, and really enjoyed it, enjoyed the living abroad side of it. And then so as soon as I'd done that and that was over, I started looking for jobs abroad and thought I can do this job somewhere else in the world and experience it from a different cultural perspective. And that was a really exciting prospect.
Sounds cool. I've got a good question for you. And before this chat, I was like, should I share the questions with you? And you were like, no. But let's see how we go. It's my favorite question. And some of the audience who've listened to the podcast might know what's coming here. My question I want to ask you is, what do you think it means to be a good international school music teacher? Take your time.
So what's interesting, what I've noticed about international schools is sometimes how uninternational they are in some ways. And I think it's very easy to find yourself in a bubble, and for schools to have an identity, to build an identity that possibly blocks out some of the outside world, which we do anywhere, wherever you are, if you're in inner city London, if you're in Japan, wherever it is. And so I think to be a really inspiring teacher of any subject, but particularly music, where the kind of diversity and culture is so central to it, is to always be looking outwards and always be looking to bring people together from different places.
Love that answer. Thanks, Emma. We're going to pass over to Tara. So Tara, thanks for joining us. And you are in your second year at Regents International School, Bangkok, right?
That's right.
Cool. Similar question that I asked Emma. What was your motivation for teaching music internationally?
I feel like I've always meant to come abroad and teach music. I grew up in international schools. So actually I was an expat and went to an international school in Hong Kong and Singapore. I actually went to Tanglin Junior School at the time from 1990 to 1995. So, and then Holland. So having, then studied music in England, I always dreamt of coming back to the international world because I'd had such an enriching experience growing up. And the family memories and the memories of school just always felt so, the broad international mindedness has always stuck with me. Coming to England and sort of just noticing the differences between people and how I always gravitated to people who were from another country. So I always knew that I just wanted to connect with more people abroad. So having taught in England for a while, I found my moment, and my kids grew up a little bit to apply for a job abroad. So it's worked.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
So how many years were you international as a child? Was it your whole
18
schooling?
years, yeah.
Yeah.
18
so
years.
Would you describe yourself as like a third culture kid, that terminology?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I don't know, third culture kid, yeah. There you go. I mean, I always grew up saying, Mummy, where am I from? You're English and Dad's Dutch, and we live in Singapore. And when people ask me where I'm from, what do I say? Because I don't sound English. And when you grow up in an international school, you pick up that sort of twang, the either Australian, American twang.
Yes.
And it's that accent you pick up. So it was always really interesting kind of figuring out where my roots are, because obviously we went to England every summer, sometimes Christmases. And yeah, it's interesting as well, taking my children on the same journey.
Yes.
Because I've got a 6 and an 8-year-old who obviously just moved just over a year ago. So, you know, they're finding their feet in terms of being international, but for them, I'm not sure if they feel that's a home yet. Still early days.
Such an interesting concept, like the where is home thing, right? How does that then kind of inform you as a teacher, do you think, as a music educator or just generally as an international school teacher? With your background, such an interesting background in international schooling, how is that informing you now, do you think?
I feel like I think back to my music teachers in, for example, Tanglin School, and doing the big productions and imagining, 8 classes, year 6s and 8 year 5s supporting the production, and how on earth do they put that together was so vast. And I sort of have that vision of that's what an international school is, and I sort of feel as if an international school always has the opportunity to put on these big shows and events, and they do cultural events in a really big way. So I think that's informed me in terms of just the understanding of the balance that you need to take between the curriculum, classroom time versus the events, and balancing that.
Tricky balance.
And also embracing the, like you were saying, Emma, the cultures, and trying to remember that our school and our community is full of all cultures, and it's difficult sometimes to get out of that bubble of, this is the British curriculum that we're doing, but how to bring in other skills of other teachers or parents to broaden that. And I still feel like at the moment I'm focused on curriculum and events, and I need to bring that in a little bit more. And I think that also comes with knowing the country better, knowing more people, networking, and bringing that in.
Yeah, it takes time to develop. Fascinating. I'm going to throw it over to the audience now. I can hardly see any of you because of these lights. But does anyone have a question for any of our panel members? If you do, just put your hand up because I will see that. Okay, a question from the audience.
Tara, as someone who grew up all over the world, did you feel, lonely, a bit sort of isolated? How often did you have to, were you forced to move? I mean, because it wasn't your say when you moved, it was your parents' say probably. And how did you kind of navigate that challenge? And do you sort of anticipate any of those issues with your own children?
Okay, Tara.
That's a good question, and I find that people ask me that quite often, actually. So I was born in Oman. 4 years later, it was Hong Kong. 4 years later, it was Singapore. 5 years later, it was Holland. And I always think that each chunk of time was a long enough period for me to feel like I'd got to know a school, a country, a group of friends, and understand it as a place before moving on. And I'm the youngest of 4 children in my family, so obviously we became very close, and that is your family unit, that stays constant. I feel like my mum was key in keeping us together, and she was very musical and conscious of transitions and things. So she was very invested in making sure it was a positive experience, and that we're all in it together. And I have to say the hardest move, I don't really remember being told when I was. Certainly don't remember being told when I was 4 that we're moving to Hong Kong, and moving then to Singapore age 7 or 8, I don't really remember that experience. But when I was 11 or 12, I left Singapore, and obviously as a nearly young teenager, that was really hard, and I didn't want to go and live in Europe. I was like, Europe is cold, and I want to be in Asia, and I feel like Europe is just a really unknown place to me, and the schooling just seems really weird. And my own experience was cousins and family that I have in England. So with the persuasion of we're going to get a dog and you can have some new jeans and you can get a bicycle, there's just little things that you can hang on to and look forward to. But it really only takes 6 months to a year before you're rolling in the new system. And because international schools are so welcoming and so inviting, and they're really good at that, welcoming you in, the expat world, I think that makes it really, really manageable. Not necessarily easy, because some children don't necessarily transition that easily. I also feel as if it was at the time of my schooling that it wasn't like in the middle of my exams, or it wasn't in, it was pretty much first year of secondary school, and then I was in my secondary school until the end. But yeah, I do often think about how are my children going to move forward with this plan, and I feel like my daughter's very open-minded and accepting, very tolerant of what is thrown her way, and my son is a lot more emotional. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and he really cried his eyes out yesterday when his grandma left back to England, and the heartbreak of feeling the distance is really strong. I might even start crying. But it's the rawness of, that's your home and your family, but we're over here. And I keep trying to remember, like, those are really happy memories, these are really happy memories, and we're creating special, unique memories, which we will always hold on to. And any visitors you have become a really tight and closely remembered time. Almost, I feel like when you visit members of the family abroad, you have a more connected time than if you're just sort of going for Sunday lunch, So I think for them moving forward, it's a matter of understanding that this is our family adventure, and where are we going to take it? Our home is where our family is, and trying to stay positive but real to their emotions, and understanding of, okay, that's what you're going through, and that's okay. So yeah.
That was a really amazing question. Thank you, and what an answer. I mean, it makes me think as teachers, like, how do we understand our students as well? When you've got this experience with your children. Emma, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just thinking back to the first question you asked about what it means to be a good international music teacher. I think in any school, in any country or place in the world, music departments play such an important role in well-being. I think if it's done well, it's a safe space where students come and can be themselves. And I think more than a lot of places, international schools need that, because well-being is something that is very much affected by the kind of transient nature, and students come and go, and families are often absent. And so that role and that responsibility that we have as music teachers is kind of emphasized, and there's more weight to it.
Nice point, yeah. It's almost like a home for...
Can be, absolutely.
Nice. Anything else to add from the panel? Tara?
I just wanted to add the other thing that I think my children find very accepting is that I am working in their school, and I'm very much part of their lives here, and I am their music teacher, and I think having that life in England wasn't possible. So it's almost as if coming abroad to work in an international school was better. It was more accessible for getting that lifestyle that we like, that we love, and spending more time with the family that way, and so that insight into their lives is really special.
We have one more question from the audience.
This is a question for everyone. As international schools get increasingly vast, you were mentioning the ways that it can still sometimes feel like a small local school, and I was interested in any ways you'd found to foster that feeling, or whether you thought that feeling was even still possible.
Delphine?
Well, I've been here for 20 years, like you were saying, and when we first started, we didn't have any children, and Tanglin was much smaller, and now I've got children, and they're teenagers, and to get the small feel is sometimes doing different events, and like this week I went to a local children's home and took 16 of the year 2 students, and just those 16, and in that moment, we went to a different environment, and they were like Tanglin ambassadors and were singing and doing playground games. And so it's kind of trying to hold on to the small stuff as well. And even though the big concerts are great, it's still doing the small things. And we've recently done some things. Last week I went to a piano concert that we hosted with some amazing new grand pianos, and one of my nursery children was playing, and there was somebody from nursery all the way up to sixth form. And so even though it's a really big school, that concert was really intimate, and the music department has started doing more of those small things. And since COVID, when we were trying to get over the performance side of things, we ended up doing one class at a time. And we're trying to hold on to that model now, because the parents fed back that it was so nice seeing their child and hearing their child, and not their child being the top right-hand corner. So we're trying to still keep things small, so they still feel part of a community, but you still get that small event feel and small.
That's one of these questions that's been coming up, right? Like, what have we kept post-COVID that are actually useful? And I haven't heard that one yet. That's a really cool one. Like,
so all of our concerts were only allowed to be one class at a time.
Yeah.
And I was saying earlier, last Christmas we were doing sign language, and we did sign language because we couldn't sing. And some of the teachers this year were like, the sign language is so great, can we do the sign language? And I was like, well, actually the children can't sing because they've had masks for 3 years, so yeah, why not? But it's those kind of things, we're doing it really small, just 24 rather than a 200.
Yeah.
Got really positive feedback.
Nice. Anyone want to add to that? Yep. Emma.
So I think with some international schools and the growth that's happening, there's that sort of sense of tiny fish, large pond. And I think, again, as music teachers, I don't want to sound like put all these responsibilities on everyone listening, that we can help to nurture a sense of students being able to embody their own sense of identity and place anywhere. And I think music departments can do that from being in an ensemble itself, can give a sense of a sense of belonging. Inclusion and diversity are kind of buzzwords at the moment, and that needs to happen in lots of different ways everywhere. But I think with music particularly, there's a kind of humanness about it that makes it even more important when you're discussing something like identity and belonging. So even in a massive school, in a large group of people, if you're doing a certain musical activity where they're engaging and communicating, they will have that sense of identity, and that's a really, really important lesson we can teach.
Love it. Well, thank you all. Thanks to the three of you for sharing your insight, your wisdom, your experience. And I think that's, if anything, what this podcast hopes to do, is just to tap into this collective understanding that we have in this community, because there's so many of us that have such different, diverse experiences in international school education. But there are some things that link us together, that draw us together. So really enjoyed that. Thanks again to the audience. And yeah, thank you again. And let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. Listen to other episodes by visiting mtiis.com, or learn more about our community on Facebook by simply searching for Music Teachers in International Schools. If you know someone who you think I should get on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at chriskoelma.com, ChrisKoelma.com. See you next time.